Right, so onwards we march. Thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for keeping the questions. Everybody do a little bit of a shakeout, sitting at your desks. Let's get ready. We have got a wonderful session that is coming up, and you can see Brian Atkinson has come up on screen here because he is going to be moderating our next session, which is the digital transformation of customer experience. And super, super exciting to actually have two guests who will be joining Brian. I see their videos appearing now. I'll pop up a little slide so that you can see who they are. So joining Brian, we are very, very glad to have Maria from Stanley Black & Decker and also Tracy from Estee Lauder. So fantastic to be able to hear some customer stories about how CX is out in the wild, so to speak. So Brian, I'm going to hand it over to you, Maria and Tracy.
Great. Thank you, Jennifer, and really looking forward to the next 30 minutes. You heard from Dan right at the very beginning that our focus here at Five9 is really helping our customers achieve better outcomes. And so really, that's what we want to spend the next 30 minutes talking about is really, the journeys that our customers have gone on and some of the outcomes that they've achieved over the past 5, 6, 7 years as they went on those journeys. So really the kind of the three key takeaways is hearing some real stories from both Maria and Tracy today, two great brands, not just in the UK, but also globally. Hearing about their lessons learned. One of the key things in advancing in any part of your life, whether it's customer experience or whether it's football, is really learning from others and understanding what best practices and what takeaways that other people would share. And really the last thing is a challenge. So I always like to give my audience a challenge and try to find one key takeaway that you can take away from today's session and figure out how you can make a difference inside of your organization that you work in today. So really those three key things is what we're going to focus on. Before we dive in, I do want to also talk about how we're going to do this session. So the key thing that I want to talk about is really the foundation of CX and how that's really important to an organization. And one of the key areas around customer experience, really you have to have a solid business strategy, a CX strategy that maps to your business strategy. So we'll dive into Tracy and Maria's business strategy and their kind of CX strategy, what it looked like today and maybe versus what it looked like 5, 7 years ago. You have to have a great culture, including the workforce. And we just heard Hugh mention that and talk about the importance of having a solid culture from an employee perspective. And really, the third area that we're going to talk about today is kind of innovation. And innovation can mean a lot of things, whether it's innovation in business processes or new ways of serving customers, but it can also be around technology and some of the kind of things that are coming down the path. So we're going to look at it from those three angles. So with that, less of hearing from me, and I'd love to hear from Maria and Tracy today. I'll do a quick introduction. Maria, thank you for joining us. Maria's the Director of Business Transformation for EMEA and ANZ. She's joining us from Belgium today, and she's been with Stanley Black & Decker for many, many years. What a great brand, and thank you for being such a great customer. We're also joined by Tracy, and Tracy is the Exec Director of Global Customer Care Operations for Estee Lauder. In fact, the first time I met Tracy, I told her how excited my daughter would be that we're talking to Estee Lauder. So she's only 13 at the moment. So I said we'll have to. She's really excited about some of the makeup and the brands that Estee Lauder brings to the UK people, which is great.
A lifetime customer in the making.
Yes, exactly. So with that, would love to kind of, again, we talked. I mentioned that we would like to kind of dive into kind of your business strategy. So I guess maybe Maria, kind of starting with you, what did your business strategy look like as it related to customer experience, 7 years ago, 5 years ago?
I think, first of all, hello. And I'm glad to be here. I think in the past 5, 7 years, Stanley Black & Decker has been very agile in the sense of adapting to new realities, acquisitions, and things like that. And we've always tried to get to that common platform or that common process in all the aspects of a customer service team, whether if it's the call center or the actual operational process or the day-to-day. And this has been one of our key milestones in the past 5 years. Now, I must say 5.9 or the implementation of 5.9 was one of the pillars that we chose to go for. And I think we started this journey in 2018, 2017, I think. I don't know. If Dave Ogden is on the call, and he might be able to keep me sane here, but it was one of the key pillars to keep consistency across the teams. We've got teams all over Europe in different countries, different languages, and they couldn't even transfer phone calls across different offices within the same country. So that was something quite crazy back at the time. And essentially, we've been, in the way I see other companies, other organizations, I think we've been a little bit behind on a lot of what can be done or we should be doing in customer service. And the implementation of 5.9 was that first step on the technology journey, if I may call it like that. And we're hoping to keep going into what would be more an integrated customer portal type of approach where everything joins together, right? So I think that's, in a few sentences, where we were, where we're heading to, kind of thing.
No, thanks for that insight. And I mean, you mentioned some challenges, right? Some things around acquisitions, and when your company grows and expands, you're not only acquiring new people with potentially different culture, but also new technologies. And I think that those challenges of how do you standardize, how do you provide consistent operational views across multiple lines of business, all major challenges. So it sounds like you've had an exciting 5 to 7 years over the past few years.
Always at Stanley Black & Decker.
Very good, very good. Well, Tracy, I'd love to ask kind of you the same question, from an Estee Lauder perspective. What did things look like 7 years ago compared to how they're looking today from a kind of a CX strategy or business strategy perspective?
So very, very different. I think we had lots of channels then, but kind of multi-channel rather than omni-channel for sure. No single view, definitely no kind of global. So to pick up on Maria's point, each different kind of country, region, territory, etc., doing things very, very different. A lot of our technology was on premise. I think if you'd have said work from home, everybody would have laughed, run a contact center that's not kind of sat directly in front of you, absolutely not. And I think, very, very transactional in our approach, very much a cost center, very much you need to have this to problem solve for customers, but not seeing as kind of a value add. And like I say, also very disparate and no single view. So a lot of, common themes, I think, with what Maria has said, and also some of the things that we've heard earlier in the presentation. And I'm fascinated with the speed with which, those things have changed in terms of kind of omni-channel and, video and all of that type of thing. So, so for us, it was just very disparate, I think. And our journey has looked very much at how can we bring that together and how can we transition that to be about being customer centric and about adding value and not about just being about cost, but actually recognizing the great role that contact centers and customer service teams have, as the sort of heart of an operation. So very, very different over that time.
Yeah, definitely. And it's good to see that you guys have embraced change and trying to figure out how to keep up with the market. As we heard from Stephen earlier, right? The ever evolving market is changing so fast. It keeps us all on our toes. It keeps us all excited. It keeps us all in jobs that we really enjoy doing, because we're also passionate around the customer experience space. So it's a little bit about, I guess, kind of the business strategy, the CX strategy, the way it looked a little bit before. Talk to me about how kind of the customers evolved. So customer insights is always very critical, voice of the customer, those types of things. How have your customers evolved over the past few years, and what types of things have they been looking or pushing your organizations further? And so maybe Maria, if you want to take a look at that.
Yeah, so I think for us, we have two distinct customer types in the evolution, if I may call it like that. You've got the retailers who don't want to talk to us at all. Like they're just like, here's a portal to do whatever in our portal and fill in the data there. We just don't want to hear you. And then you've got what we call the traditional trade. So keep in mind, we sell drills and, screwdrivers and hammers, and those are sold in little moms and pop shops, hardware stores, where typically there's a very traditional way of doing business. And those guys want to have the day-to-day contact with the same person, always the same guy. I'm calling Brian and I want to speak to Brian, even though anybody else in the team might be able to answer the question, but the guy wants to talk to Brian because he's the guy who knows him, and so on and so forth. So we've had to adapt a little bit the journey into, okay, we know these guys don't want to have anything to do with us in terms of phone calls and interactions, and everything is kind of more automation driven, and we need to adapt the journey for those. And then you've got the traditional ones that we would like to verge a little bit more towards a semi-automated kind of way of working with them, but they are still very anchored to the traditional ways. So I think that's how they are evolving. Slowly but surely, that traditional trade looks to be modernizing itself. I think as new generations pick up the businesses and things like that, they seem to be modernizing themselves, but it's a very slow process. And I think at the moment we're like in between two waters in a sense, which is exciting because you need to adapt and change constantly, but it also makes our way of doing business and the tools that we choose to do business slightly complex.
Well, it links right back to the first point that we talked about, which is the CX or business strategy. It's, how do you evolve with the demands of your consumers, right? And I think it's important to have that identification of the two different types there, and to hear that you've kind of had to address both those types of consumers of Stanley Black & Decker's products, right? So yeah. Great. And Tracy, from your perspective, I'd be curious to know what the demand you've seen. I mean, obviously a different type of organization, Stanley Black & Decker versus Estee Lauder. What are you seeing in the consumer space as it comes to the products that you guys sell?
So I think we've definitely seen consumers wanting to do more self-service, expecting to be able to do more self-service, and expecting, I guess, to be more kind of have information served up to them in an easily digestible way. So whether that's information about kind of orders, nobody wants to go and have to track an order. They want that information just sent to them as soon as it's kind of available, for example. But if they do need to do it, then they want to be able to do that in their own time and seamlessly. They don't want to have to speak to somebody to do those kind of simple transactional pieces of activity. I think, and then what we're seeing, I guess, on the flip side of that is the piece around perhaps, when it is more complex, or when it's, in our industry, obviously more personal and more related to, beauty. So maybe I want some advice, or I want to talk to you about a specific product. Then I want to engage with a person. I want to be able to engage with that person on my kind of channel of choice. So whether that's a digital channel, predominantly a digital channel, so that I can, get that advice, whether it's about color matching or whether it's about a specific product, etc. And I guess that you know me, you understand some of those concerns that I've got, and that, as an agent, you are better informed than I am. So anybody can go to the internet and Google search something. So therefore, my expectation is that when I do connect with a real human, as opposed to maybe doing some self-serve or AI, etc., then I'm actually getting somebody who is super knowledgeable and has got that information at their fingertips. And that, for us, I guess, can be a bit of a challenge because, we have a portfolio of many, many brands and many, many products. So making sure that kind of knowledge is available to our teams instantly so they can pull it up and have really rich conversations with consumers.
Wow, I've got so many questions, and it's a shame we only have 30 minutes today to talk about it. So it's so insightful to hear you talk about your brands and how you're servicing, and what the demand looks like from different customers. So again, we kind of first talked about CX strategy. We then talked a little bit about kind of customer insights. Love to hear like what what your customers are demanding for you or asking for. Let's talk a little bit about kind of culture, like CX culture inside of your organization. So your employees and staff, and I know we've gone through obviously the remote working and COVID, but I'd be more curious a little bit to understand, kind of mindsets. How do you drive a mindset of great customer experience inside of your organization? So maybe, Tracy, we'll go right back to you. Driving a CX kind of mindset and building that culture. What's key from your perspective? What have you guys done at Estée Lauder?
So I think probably a couple of things. I think, one of the things that's really key for me as well is understanding that. And I think, some of your previous speakers today have spoken about this, that the expectations of our consumers are actually very aligned to the expectations of our employees. So, everybody is digitally enabled. So you need to make sure that, what you're using for your advisors, your agent population, your employees, it matches with what their expectations are that they can do as a consumer, and also that's what our consumers can do. But we've also implemented quite a lot of programs around kind of communities of best practice and sort of brand ambassadorship type programs, so that our teams can really get on board with what we're trying to do and speak from a kind of what consumers are telling them lens about this doesn't work, this is clunky, this is what our expectations are. And that they can actually really, I guess, have feel that they have an input and a say into how we drive that strategy forward. So rather than it just being a very, say, technology-led, we're going to implement this at these times, etc., that it's really very based on the pain points and the conversations that they have with consumers.
Two of my favorite words. One is expectations. I think that's you hit the nail on the head there. I think that's really key. And communities to me just screams like teamwork, right? That just talks to me about how do we drive, a sense of community across an organization. So yeah, love hearing those perspectives. Maria, would love to hear your thoughts on kind of that same question.
We are maybe a slightly different organization in that sense. We, just to give a little bit of context, we come from historically in our organization, customer service was under the commercial structure. So for many different reasons, but the reality is that created an environment where customer service was the commercial assistant type of role. So we ended up being an administrative type of team where I need to run a report, I need to do this, and customer service ended up getting the request and doing that for the commercial team. So in terms of mindset, that is very challenging because the customer service teams today, they don't feel, slowly they're changing, but 2 years ago or 3 years ago, they didn't feel like they had that relationship or they didn't have any impact into that customer experience. And in all fairness, the organization as a whole was also not looking at it in that direction. I think for many reasons, probably the pandemic has been one of them, but this has progressively changed, right? The commercial teams were not able to visit the stores anymore. They were stuck at home as well. And the only way we were talking to customers was through the customer service team. So that has kind of helped the change. But I think we also still have a long ways to go in terms of what Tracy was pointing out earlier, right? This mindset of channels and communities within the organization. In our organization, this is like, we don't have time for that. We're too busy. We don't have time to do communities and workplace and things like that. Just let me get on with my job so I can actually do something that is value added for the organization. And which is good, but I think maybe in the process, we lose potentially some of that knowledge sharing. And we're working on actually getting all the customer services under what we call operations. So we're giving them a voice as well onto, hey, you guys are important to customer experience. You're important to the success of the organization, because without you, there's no orders. Without you, there's no deliveries. Without you, there's nothing. So we're trying to kind of change that mindset. But like I mentioned earlier, with all the acquisitions, you've got all these different type of mentalities, ways of working, ways of thinking, of how we should be handling the customer relationship. And it is a long-term journey to realign everybody into one way, one team, one mentality kind of thing.
Yes, you're absolutely right. It really is a mindset across the organization, and it starts with, the business strategy at the beginning of, what kind of company are we? What type of customer experience do we want to deliver? And then once that's defined, it's like, how do you make sure that, that type of CX mindset across the entire organization? It's great to hear how you've elevated your customer care environment to kind of a higher level with getting more mindset and buy-in across the organization. So very interesting. Let's kind of move on to the kind of the last and final pillar, I would call it, of CX, and this is around innovation. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, we could take this in many directions, right? Process innovation, insight innovation, CX design and innovation, but would really like to look at that from kind of a technology perspective. So obviously, you've been on Five9 platforms for many years, and we talked about some of the centralized benefits, the flexible nature of things, the single global operational view. But let's talk a little bit about innovation. And Stephen mentioned earlier today about leveraging data. So I'd love to get your perspective, Tracy, on kind of leveraging data. What does leveraging data mean to your organization? How do you see that playing in your customer experience?
Yeah, I have to say it's been, that has been a sort of really key part of our roadmap over the last few years, and as we continue to go forward. And I think it's that insight piece, it's that bit that really gets people in the organization that wouldn't necessarily get that close to a customer. It gets them close, and I think what it's enabled us to do is really look at our customer feedback through so many different lenses, whether that's drivers of dissatisfaction, or whether that's requirements for products, or whether that's feeds through social media, etc. And some of the things that it's actually really enabled us to do, as well as obviously improve processes and reduce any of those sort of dissatisfaction drivers, is really understand any gaps in our kind of product set or any opportunities. And we had a really big success a few years ago where we were having a lot of insight coming through about certain product in one of our brands that we had discontinued and consumers loved and wanted to bring back. And, so there was actually a direct revenue kind of generation opportunity as a result of that, where we were able to bring back a product that people really, really missed. There's a number of different kind of lenses, but I think, and also the one I probably didn't mention that should have mentioned is also, from a compliance perspective, to make sure that we're obviously doing everything that we should from that angle. So so many different ways that we can apply that. So from a business perspective, it's certainly been the lever, I think, to help us drive some of the innovation in our contact center because of the insight we've been able to give back.
Excellent. I'd love to hear that, especially the fact that you've been able to identify a brand that needed to be able to help generate more revenue inside of an organization. So leveraging data to generate more revenue. I mean, that's a perfect example of an outcome right inside the contact center. So love to hear that. Maria, from your perspective, I mean, again, so many questions. You talked about how you were maybe a cost center before, and a little bit around. You mentioned some automation technologies, but would love to just hear your perspective on how innovation technology has helped Stanley Black & Decker.
I think, like, again, we are far behind from where Tracy and the steel of their companies are. I think in our way, technology is something that we've always talked about, and there's been a lot of investment in the marketing space of technology, and especially as well the product. But for the operational day-to-day, there hasn't been really much focus on it until the last couple of years. So I think for us, the key milestone that changed how the organization viewed the whole situation was, again, the pandemic. The fact that we were able to say, everybody go home, just, we continue business as usual. That was something that I don't think senior leadership in Stone Black and Decker ever thought was possible, right? We have offices all over the world, and we are focusing more on that side of what can we do more operationally. There's a lot of discussion about data and how we use data and things like that, but we are not at this point generating the need for the customer to give us that data, in a sense. So you do, again, I go back to my retail versus traditional guys, but the retailers are some of those that work more in that environment, sharing the data and what do we do with that, and how can we collaborate together. And then you've got the traditional trade, which they just want their products. And I think we are there in that aspect, but we don't speak to the end users, which I think is one of the main differences as well with what Tracy was mentioning, right? We are more B2B type of organization. So that means all that input comes through the website, through the marketing, through the development teams, the product teams, and so on and so forth. And we are more with the operational aspect of it. So in terms of technology and data, we want to get there. And it's one of the reasons why, we implement Five9, we implement Salesforce. But we're at a stage where we are using the tool, we're getting the teams to get used to the tool, we're getting the teams to get used to the fact that, hey, you don't need to have a phone on the desk. Guess what? It goes on the computer. And there's some guys over there like, are you serious? This cannot be possible, because they've been in the company for 40 years. They're the granddaughters of people that worked for the company 80 years ago. And the mind is, challenging in terms of how do we change it and how is that even possible? So I think from a technology standpoint, we are getting to a point where we have that baseline built so that we can then use it to extract or to optimize our processes, our ways we engage with customers and so on through the information and the data we get on those platforms.
Great. Oh, that's such insightful information. And wow, doesn't 30 minutes go quick? Very fast. I've got so many questions, and I've seen a few questions come into the chat as well. But I do want to respect people's time and keep things on track. So let me just first off just say, thank you, Maria. Thank you, Tracy. Getting to speak with you and our teams getting to work with such great brands like yourselves on a daily basis is truly a humbling experience. So thank you for spending time with us today. Thank you for sharing us how you see CX inside of your organization and really how you approach a great customer experience. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Genefa.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Brian. Thank you, Tracy and Maria. I just think it's just so awesome, actually. And someone pointed out in the audience, two completely opposite brands and how the common thread really is that great customer experience. And I took some key takeaways. I took down holistic customer journey and the need for personalization, the need for informed agents. I think that's really important. And the importance of data in the CX transformation. So I just love that. I love the fact that we've got such a diverse base of customers and you were both able to speak. So really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Wonderful.